Viktor Orban visited Vladimir Putin in Moscow at the Kremlin, and the European Union and NATO are furious. Why are they furious? Well, we are going to get into this. In part, they're furious because Hungary is a EU member. It's also a NATO member, and it is the first member to formally meet with Vladimir Putin since April of 2022. What was happening at that time? Well, the peace negotiations were happening at that time. And so here you see the connection, right? NATO and the EU blocked those negotiations. They destroyed those negotiations, which were going to end in a peace settlement. And here you have Hungary coming in with Viktor Orban at its head, attempting to re-energize that kind of momentum toward peace. But NATO and the EU are not having any of it. So let us take a look at what happened exactly. So here is the handshake that shook the world: Vladimir Putin and Viktor Orban meeting at the Kremlin. So what would proceed from there was a 3-hour meeting between the two sides. And after the meeting, both Viktor Orban and Vladimir Putin addressed the media. And here is what they had to say. So first, here's what Viktor Orban had to say after his extensive meeting with Vladimir Putin. And what I'm going to do, because I believe this video is going to only be English text, like English subtitles. And so for those, there isn't like an English dub over it. So for those who what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to read what Viktor Orban had to say. So he said, sorry about that. So he said, without diplomacy, without communication, we will not achieve peace. Peace won't come on its own. You need to work for it. We discussed ways to achieve peace with Mr. President Putin today. I wanted to know which path is the shortest path to the end of the war. I wanted to hear and heard the opinion of Mr. President Putin on 3 important questions: the current peace initiatives. What does he think of them? What does he also think about a ceasefire and peace negotiations, and in what sequence can they be done? So that is what Viktor Orban discussed with Vladimir Putin, all of it surrounding a future peace settlement in Ukraine. Doesn't sound too controversial, right? But here is what Vladimir Putin had to say. Okay, so we're going to now go to Vladimir Putin's words, and here we will have an English dub so we can listen to a bit more of it. Although I just want to read DD Geopolitics, good friend of the show. Do follow them on all platforms: YouTube, Twitter, X, I should say, and Telegram. But DD Geopolitics gave a good outline before we get into it. They said, Putin said Ukrainian troops must withdraw from Donetsk, Lugansk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson before peace negotiations can ensue. We already knew that was Russia's position. Putin revealed that he discussed with Orban possible ways to settle the Ukraine conflict, and the Hungarian prime minister mentioned his recent contacts in Kiev. Orban called for a ceasefire to create conditions for negotiations on Ukraine, as Putin reported. Russia sees Kiev is not ready to abandon the war completely, and Kiev refuses to consider a ceasefire as it would remove the pretext for extending martial law. That's what Putin said. And then Moscow advocates for a complete and final resolution to the conflict, not just a ceasefire or pause for Kiev's rearmament, said Putin. And he also noted that if Ukraine ends martial law, they would have to hold presidential elections, with the current Ukrainian authorities' chances of winning, according to Russian President Vladimir Putin, close to 0. So essentially, Vladimir Putin is putting the blame on Kiev for the lack of peace negotiations occurring at the moment. And as you will see soon, it's not just Kiev, it is also the EU and NATO. But here, let's listen to a little bit of what Vladimir Putin had to say.
Of course, we had very constructive and frank exchange of opinions on topical international matters. Including the conflict in Ukraine. We talked about possible ways of settling it.
Módokon történő elrendezéséről is, elrendezés lehetőségeiről.
Prime Minister told us about his recent meetings in Kiev, where he proposed a number of ideas and initiatives, including the proposition to cease fire, to start peace negotiations with Russia.
Hogy hogyan lehetne elkezdeni a béketárgyalásokat.
As for Russia, I have said repeatedly that we have always been open for discussion or political and diplomatical settlement of the issue.
Mindig azt mondtam, hogy nyitottak vagyunk a politikai, diplomáciai tárgyalásokra.
However, from the opposite side, we've been hearing about unwillingness to solve the matter in this way.
Azt halljuk, hogy nincs akarat semmilyen módon megoldani a konfliktust.
Ukraine's sponsors continue to try to use this country and its people as a ram, as a sacrifice against Russia.
So that is what Vladimir Putin had to say. That was the crux of it. Vladimir Putin and Russia's position is quite simple. It is that peace negotiations will occur based on the realities on the ground. The realities on the ground are that Russia is not only winning the war, but that in many instances, the conflict has not come to any kind of stalemate. It has come to the point where Russian victory is inevitable. It's just a matter of how long that will take. And so with that, taking that into consideration, Vladimir Putin says that the only, and this is from Russia's perspective, and we have to take into account that Lugansk, Donetsk, Zaporozhye, those territories that have been, as part of referendums, integrated into Russia, must not be on the table for Ukraine, that there will be no concessions there. So that is a pretty basic position. That is the one that Vladimir Putin, ever since the victory, especially of Russia in the so-called vaunted Ukraine counteroffensive of 2023. Ever since Russia defeated Ukraine there, in that instance, Russia's position has been even more solid. But let us get to now the reaction from NATO and the European Union, because it is quite something. And I say EU and NATO basically, I use them simultaneously because they are, in fact, in many ways the same. So here's what The Guardian had to say, even though this is coming from so-called UK, which is not in the European Union. But Viktor Orban visits Vladimir Putin to the condemnation of fellow EU leaders. Brussels disassociates itself from Hungarian PM Moscow's trip, which he tried to cast as a peace mission. So Viktor Orban, Europe's most pro-Russian leader, met Vladimir Putin at the Kremlin on Friday on a rare trip to Russia that drew strong condemnation from other European leaders. Orban's visit to Moscow came just days after he made a similar unannounced trip to Kiev, as the Hungarian prime minister attempts to position himself as a peace broker between Russia and Ukraine. Shortly after landing in Russia for his first trip to the country since Putin launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Orban published a photo with the caption, "The peace mission continues. Next stop, Moscow." So, as I already went over what the joint press conference brought, and Orban has said that, his Kiev visit was not so successful in the sense that his terms were not, and the terms of peace were not taken very well, as Vladimir Putin and Russia knows very well, and as most of the world can see, Ukraine is not prepared to negotiate. They don't want to. They want to continue the war at all costs. So Here is what they had to say. Brussels. Okay, here's what the EU had to say. Brussels was quick to denounce the visit, stressing Orban did not speak for the EU. That's what they keep saying. Don't speak for the EU. You don't speak for the EU. Even though Hungary is part of the EU. Well, anyway, so Brussels was quick to announce the visit, saying that Orban didn't speak for the EU and had, quote, not received any mandate from the EU Council to visit Moscow, end quote. Prime Minister Viktor Orban's visit to Moscow takes place exclusively in the framework of bilateral relations between Hungary and Russia. The Hungarian Prime Minister is thus not representing the EU in any form, said Jungle Josep Borrell, the EU's foreign policy chief, in a statement. So Ukraine also condemned Orban's visit, saying that, quote, it was done without approval or coordination with Kiev, as if Hungary needs to coordinate with Kiev. But we must continue. The Ukrainian Foreign Ministry said in a statement that the principle of no agreements on Ukraine without Ukraine remain inviolable for our country. This is so ironic because we see Ursula von der Leyen, Josep Borrell, we see Olaf Scholz, German chancellor. We also see Jens Stoltenberg, all of them. What they're all saying is there can be no negotiations without Ukraine, but they all have allowed Ukraine to peddle this pathetic peace initiative, right? This peace initiative which they didn't even want to support openly in Switzerland at that ridiculous Swiss, what was it, mid-June, that ridiculous conference. They didn't even want to openly support it, but they allowed their puppet Ukraine to parade it, and it had no involvement from Russia. And now they want to say, well, no, there has to be involvement from Ukraine. If Ukraine doesn't approve and rubber stamp everything that a country like Hungary does to try to initiate peace, then it absolutely is illegitimate, right? This is just hypocrisy at its finest. So Hungary has been at odds with other Western countries over Orban's continued cultivation of close ties with Russia and refusal to send arms to Ukraine. And Budapest's foreign minister called plans to help the country a crazy mission in May. So there's even divisions inside of Hungary, unsurprising. So there you have it. This doesn't also have what Ursula. Oh, here we go. Ursula von der Leyen. This is what she had to say. Appeasement will not stop Putin. Only unity and determination will pave a path to a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in Ukraine. But do you see how the response here? Okay, you just have the European Union foreign policy chief say that all peace negotiations must occur with Ukraine. Then you have Ursula von der Leyen, right, saying we need to not appease Putin. Appeasing Putin doesn't do anything. So essentially, what the EU is saying, and of course what NATO is also saying, because we know that Jens Stoltenberg and people like this all believe in the same thing. They all walk lockstep for the U.S. war machine. Okay, they all said the same thing. They all condemned it. They all said that he is not representing Orban, not representing them, NATO, not representing the EU. But the reality of the matter is that what they are saying is that they're not at all open to peace negotiations that involve Russia. And how preposterous is this? So this is the bomb. This is how Viktor Orban, in just doing something so simple, which helps him politically, it makes him look like a strong and concerted and thoughtful European leader here. He is the one who wins here because he's the only one in the EU and NATO right now. It's been 2+ years since anyone in the European Union has met Vladimir Putin. And at that time, there were actual peace negotiations happening that almost led to a peace settlement. So this is how just absolutely unhinged, absolutely dangerous NATO and the EU have become. They've become wedded toward an all-out confrontation with Russia, and they can't handle what Viktor Orban did here. They couldn't handle it. They've been exposed. But I want to show you now. So Viktor Orban calls this a peace mission, right? He met with Zelensky first. That's important. And I think that was strategic because as much as Viktor Orban has taken an independent position on Russia and Vladimir Putin throughout the conflict, he also didn't want to come off. And this is just par for the course for any country that's in the EU and in NATO. I mean, we see NATO with Turkey playing all sides. This is par for the course. So obviously he didn't want to come off looking like he was favoring Putin and Russia over Ukraine. He met with Kiev first. He met with Zelensky first, and he was given the cold shoulder. Vladimir Putin gave him a very warm welcome, gave him 3 hours, took everything he said seriously, and outlined Russia's position in an articulate, professional manner. That is what leadership is. That is what diplomacy is. That's politics. Now, I want to show you what Viktor Orban penned in Newsweek. We won't read it necessarily, but you can get the gist of his position. And what's so interesting about this position is I don't agree with it. The point of NATO was never peace, in my opinion. But you can see what Viktor Orban is doing here. Viktor Orban is a product of the post-Soviet era. He's a product of the rapacious, just push to a more unstable, a more undemocratic, a more just absolutely unhinged and destabilized Eastern Europe after the fall of the Soviet Union. So that's where Hungary is right now. That's what it has been. It's been completely neoliberalized. And for all of Viktor Orban's positions on foreign policy, we know that Hungary has also not necessarily always been a friend of progress and global progress. But we have to give Hungary a lot of credit for its relations with Russia and China and how it has conducted itself during this conflict. But this is the position that Orban has. Hungary is a NATO member. Hungary is a European Union member state. Viktor Orban literally penned this op-ed saying that NATO is for peace. And you can see what he was trying to do here was say that actually, look, NATO was not about bringing about total destruction and war. I disagree. But what he was trying to do was say that NATO needs to return to its supposed principles. Okay? Its principles that are outlined, that they talk about all the time. Jens Stoltenberg and all of these NATO functionaries, Joe Biden, NATO is not for war, it's for peace. We're here to bring peace and democracy to Europe, and that's what we're trying to preserve after the fall of the Soviet Union, blah, blah, blah. You know, all the garbage and nonsense. But Viktor Orban was attempting to leverage that for the purposes of this meeting and to show that there is a debate that can be had about what function should NATO have. I mean, it's a very smart move in many ways. Okay, so I don't agree with that position. I mean, anyone that has seen NATO's behavior, has witnessed NATO's behavior, has been paying attention to NATO's behavior all over the world since its formation, really. I mean, NATO absorbed a lot of the real NAZIs that were defeated in Germany and then went on to try to provoke the Soviet Union at all costs in so many different times, including in Hungary. But no, that's neither here nor there. The point is, though, that what we've seen from NATO, even in the 21st century, from Afghanistan and onward, shows that NATO is not for peace. That's a ridiculous opinion. But Viktor Orban has taken this position to push NATO, to push those really in the collective West, because Hungary's outside of the collective West. Hungary is moving more and more back to the East. That's been the trajectory. And now Hungary is trying to leverage both sides to try to bring about a settlement, which is absolutely destroying the fabric of Europe and destroying the economic and political base of Europe itself. And that has negative consequences for Hungary as well. So this visit absolutely drove the neocons, the warmongers in Washington and NATO and the EU absolutely mad. To talk about this as appeasing Putin just shows there is no room for peace at the moment. But that is to the detriment not of Viktor Orban, not of Vladimir Putin. Actually, this helps them. It helps them because they are the only ones talking about peace, legitimately. There is no talk about peace. When the NATO summit happens, you know, what is that, June 9th, 10th, 11th, whatever. When it happens on those dates, there will be no talks of peace. There will be none. There will be talks of, well, how do we continue to fortify our efforts against Russia? How do we continue to look east toward China and curb all the threats? There will be no talk of peace. And this is where the problem truly lies. If you want to look at who is provoking a global confrontation, if you want to look at who is really responsible for the hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians that have already died, Ukrainian soldiers, the thousands upon thousands of more that are going to die in the preceding days, weeks, and months ahead, you have nowhere else to look but NATO. Because this matters. They want to tell you none of this matters. It doesn't matter that Viktor Orban and Vladimir Putin met. It's just bread and circuses. It doesn't make any difference. It's all about their own selfish interests. Then why would they meet? If they weren't interested at all in peace, what's the point of even meeting? Is it just to strengthen their political position? Does Russia really need help strengthening its political position, military position vis-a-vis Ukraine? I don't think so. Russia is in a pretty stable situation. Last time I checked, Russia has been named a high-income country by the World Bank. Russia is growing 2-3 times faster than all of the rest of Western Europe. I mean, we are talking about Russia, which is having a decisive advantage on the battlefield. And then you have Hungary. Hungary's political leadership is not in trouble. Viktor Orban is not in trouble. Actually, this peace mission only helps his standing on the world stage. So all of this is to say is that NATO and the EU are the ones that have been put on notice. And they have been continuously exposed as the vile warmongers that they are. And that is the reason why this meeting angered them so much. When something like this happens, when you see this outright condemnation of a particular move, something that maybe shouldn't seem so big in retrospect, when it becomes a huge news story because of the collective West, well, it really is all about the collective West, the EU, NATO leaders. They're unable to hold back their rapacious and rabid warmongering urges. This was Ursula, this was Jens Stoltenberg, this was all of them, Biden, all etc., unable to hold back their impulses and urges toward war when the reality, it's so simple. They're just talking about a peace settlement to a conflict that simply cannot go on forever. That's not controversial. But in the world that we live in today, in the world ruled by these rabid sycophants for war, well, it is controversial. Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.